Am I audible? You are audible, sir. Thank you.
Sabhayai Namaha. Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu, Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu, Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu, Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Greetings from the Department of Sanskrit Studies, School of Humanities, University of Hyderabad. I, Vinaya Ballapur from the department, welcome you all to the third lecture in the Tadvidyasambhāṣā series of lectures initiated by our professor and head of the department, Professor J.S.R. Prasad Garu. Our last two lectures were on the confluence between Ayurveda and philosophy, basically Vedanta, and Ayurveda and modern science, respectively. Today we have a very special Tadvidyasambhāṣā on the critical edition of Skandapurāṇa by an eminent international scholar, Professor Peter Bisschop, Professor of Sanskrit and Ancient Cultures of South Asia, Leiden University, Netherlands. We are glad to have many scholars joining in. We are very glad to have our VC sir also sparing time for us. I request Professor J.S.R. Prasad Garu, Head of the Department Sanskrit Studies, to welcome our honorable speaker, Professor Peter Bisschop, and the esteemed gathering here.
Thank you. Namaste Bhai. Very good evening to all the participants of the lecture. I cordially welcome Professor Peter Bisschop, professor from Leiden University. He will be introduced very soon by Girija. At the same time, I thank him for kindly accepting our invitation to deliver an online lecture, especially on Skandapurāṇa, on which he has been working for a long time. Thank you very much, sir, and I welcome you. I also welcome Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor B.J. Rao Garu, an eminent scientist in India. We are lucky to have him here in our university as the Vice Chancellor, because normally the scientists are least bothered about the humanities or social sciences. But our Vice Chancellor has a special interest in humanities and social sciences. He encourages us a lot in many aspects. So thank you very much, sir, for joining.
Thank you.
And I also welcome Mrs. Mika Bakar. Of course, she is the student of Professor Peter, and our earlier student in this university. She has attended a couple of courses last semester. Indeed, through her only, I came into contact with Professor Peter. So I welcome you, Mika ji. Thank you. And I welcome all our research scholars, PG students, and project fellows who joined in this wonderful lecture today. Just 2 words about the Skandapurāṇa and the critical edition to make you more familiar with what exactly is being mentioned. Skandapurāṇa is the largest of all the major 18 Puranas. In fact, we can say that it is only next to the Mahabharata. Mahabharata has 1 lakh shlokas, whereas believe there may be 80,000 shlokas in Skandapurāṇa. It is divided into 7 khandas. Maheshwara Khanda, Vishnu Khanda, Brahma Khanda, like this. It has a lot of information with regard to Kathas, Mahatmyas, etc. For example, Tirtha Mahatmya, Prabhasa Kshetra Mahatmya, Dwaraka Kshetra Mahatmya, many interesting things. Beginning of the text is something like a sacrifice is performed by sage Suta at Naimisharanya. Later, many sages gathered over there, and the sage Lomasha addresses the congregation about the characteristics and various incidents related to the creator, sustainer, and destroyer of these worlds, Maheshwara, Vishnu, and Brahma. And Kshetras like Kashi, Avanti, etc. These are also discussed over there. So this is about this Skandapurāṇa, one of the 18 Puranas authored by sage Vyasa. And with regard to the critical edition, it is critical edition basically aims at reconstruction of a text which will be very nearest to the work of the original author. So that way, the scholar who is critically editing a text must be very conversant with the methodology of the text criticism. That is a very challenging task, because manuscriptology and paleography encompasses so many important things, because the scripts written and the manuscripts are really become obsolete. There are not many scholars who would able to read these scripts. So this is a very difficult task. On such a thing, today our speaker, Professor Peter G, is going to deliver a lecture. And with this very brief introduction, I welcome you all once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for giving us an introduction to Skandapurāṇa. And now, as our Vice Chancellor, sir, is with us, sir, we would be grateful if you could give a short message to the gathering.
Namaste to all of you. I want to formally welcome Professor Peter Bisschop and Mike Baker Garu to University of Hyderabad in space. I hope sometime in future they will visit us in person so that we can sit with them and learn about India. Skandapurāṇa has been familiar to us since our childhood, but the intricate details can only be heard from scholarships such as Peter Bisschop. In some sense, Skandapurāṇa is a entire Bharatvarsha in terms of its centers of cultural heritage, etc., etc. It reflects the entire Indian subcontinent. So we are all students of Skandapurāṇa, and it's our special privilege and blessing that we are hearing from a scholar such as Peter Bisschop on this very, very venerable topic to us. So I'm all ears. I'm not here to talk much. I'm all ears on this particular topic because this is very, very dear to our hearts. Namaste to all of you and welcome again.
Thank you so much, sir. We now have our project assistant, Ms. Girija, who will be introducing our speaker of the day, Professor Peter Bisschop.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the speaker of the day, Honorable Professor Peter C. Bisschop. He has done his PhD in the area of religious studies, which was awarded in 2004. He has pursued a doctoral degree, which is equivalent to MA in field of philosophy and Indology. He specialized in the dynamics of textual production, Sanskrit narrative literature, and early Brahmanical Hinduism, in particular Shaivism. Professor Peter has worked in the University of Edinburgh as a lecturer in Sanskrit studies. He has vast experience in the teaching field. He has taught so many courses in Sanskrit, in Indian civilization, Indian religion and philosophy, and Hinduism at the University of Edinburgh. Professor Peter has presented many papers at various platforms across the world. 5 students were awarded PhD under the supervision of Professor Peter till now, and currently 5 research students are working with him. He is the general editor of the Indo-Iranian Journal and the Gonda Indological Studies. He is the co-author of Early Shaivism and Skandapurāṇa, Sects and Centers 2006, Universal Shaivism, the appeasement of all gods and power in the Shantadhyaya of the Shivadharma Shastra 2018, a Shaiva Utopia, the Shivadharma's revision of Brahmanical Varnashrama Dharma 2021, the Varanasi Mahatmya of the Bhairava Pradurbhava, a 12th century glorification of Varanasi 2021, Primary Source and Asian Past 2021, and the Skandapurāṇa Critical Edition Volumes 2B, 4, and 2014, 18, and 21. He has published many books and also articles at various platforms. He is a book and journal referee for various journals, including journals uh, such as Bulletin of SOAS, Indo-Iranian Journal, Journal of Hindu Studies, Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Orientalist literally newspaper religion, Journal of the German Oriental Society. He has done great work in the professional career as well. He is a chairperson of Friends of the Kern Institute, Leiden, and coordinator of LIAS Network Colonial Cultures, and he has also contributed as a member of various boards and committees in the university. He has recently been awarded an ERC Advance Grant for the project Purana, Mythical Discourse and Religious Agency in the Puranic Ecumeny. Currently, Professor Peter is working as a professor of Sanskrit and Ancient Cultures of South Asia at Leiden University. His CV is very long with a lot of contributions and achievements. I am skipping many of the want of time. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker of this evening, Honorable Professor Peter C. Bisschop. Thank you.
Thank you, Girija. Now we look forward to your lecture, sir, to the lecture that we have been looking forward through the week. So I invite Professor Peter to start the lecture, and we are all ears.
Namaste to you all. Thank you very much for these kind introductions. Thank you, first of all, Professor Prasajit, for inviting me to give this talk. Also for accepting my student Mika Bakker to study her semester abroad in Hyderabad, which was a very successful experience for her. Also, thank you to Girija Gole for the kind words. Also, a special thank you for the attendance of the Vice Chancellor of Hyderabad University. Then I will open up my presentation now, and if somebody of you can tell me that it's visible, that would help. It's going to appear now, I hope. I cannot see you, so if somebody can tell me.
Yes, it is visible, sir.
It is
Okay,
very clear.
very good. Then I will start now. So what I will do today, what I plan to do is to give you a sort of brief introduction and overview to the results of the project on the critical edition of the Skandapurāṇa. I should say from the start, this is not something that was achieved by me alone. This is has been a long-term undertaking by a group of scholars, started in the 1990s, and I only joined midway. But I will give some more introduction to the history of the project. So what I will do, first of all, is give a brief introduction to Puranic studies as such, some of the main challenges when you are dealing with this corpus of literature. Then I will give some general introduction to the Skandapurāṇa Critical Edition project, and the main part of my paper I would rather use to go through a couple of passages in Sanskrit. I will translate them and discuss them in order to give you a feel for the flavor of the text. So for a start, just a couple of points about the study of Puranas. Puranas constitute the most voluminous and enduring genre of Sanskrit literature. Their beginnings may go back to the first half of the Common Era, first millennium, but most probably most Puranas actually were composed at a later time. They were composed over many centuries. In fact, one of the real challenges is that Puranas, as I see them, are living texts. They have been living texts from the start, and they continue to be living texts, which also means that they developed over time. The form that they had in their first composition is not the same form that they have in their final product in the form of a manuscript or a published edition. So it's important from the start to stress this point that we cannot really talk about the Skandapurāṇa or the Matsya Purana. We are dealing with a body of literature that is constantly evolving. In form and appearance, Puranas typically involve mythical narratives. These narratives are framed by a dialogue between two esteemed characters of the tradition, such as sages and gods, and these dialogues immediately lend a stamp of authority to the teaching that will follow. A Purana may typically start with the appearance of a Sutta, a singer of the Purana, who may appear at a ritual meeting of sages, and then the sages will ask the Sutta to entertain them with a story, and that forms the kind of starting point for the text. I will give you an example of that precisely from the Skandapurāṇa itself. The corpus of the Purana is not static, as I said. It's constituted of dynamic texts that are in a process of constant change, adaptation, and transformation. Their current appearance, which often is in the form of poor editions only based on a handful of later manuscripts, separated by often more than a millennium from the time of composition of the text, in fact reflects a process of constant redaction and recomposition. Textual fluidity characterizes this genre more than anything and results in a dynamic canon. So if you take all of this into account, it means that we are facing some real challenges, at least if you want to study these texts also with a historical framework and historical questions in mind. And that has also meant that scholars have often thrown up their hands in despair because it's very difficult to identify them, to locate them in time and in place. Then I come to the Skandapurāṇa. The potential for progress in the historical study of Puranas has long been hampered by the absence of reliable critical editions. A critical edition is needed because only this allows us insight into the form of the text that it has over time in different circumstances. And the critical edition of the early Skandapurāṇa, I will say more about what I mean by the early Skandapurāṇa, which was long held to be lost, gives insight into the potential for change of a single Purana over time. Its critical edition, which is uniquely based on manuscripts that stretch over an entire millennium, from the early 9th to the end of the 19th century, has made it possible for the first time to trace the rich dynamics of the Purana's composition and transmission in relation to its various social, religious, historical, and spatial contexts.
Professor Peter, sorry to intervene. Yes, I think your slides are moving, right? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, here comes the first change of slide. Sorry, this was a rather long introduction maybe. So what I give you here now is a sort of a brief overview of results that have been published. The first thing that you see here is that the very first volume of the critical edition was published in 1998. So that's more than 20 years ago now. So this is a long-term project. As you see, also my name was not there yet. It was started by Rob Adriaans and Hans Bakker, my own teacher, and Harunaga Isaacson. Along the way, I've been involved in it as well. And currently, I'm editing the remainder of the text with my colleague Yuko Yokochi, who is based in Kyoto University. Then I've also listed a couple of general books published along the way because what we do is not only edit the text, but we also study it for cultural history. So if you are more interested in that and in the outcome of that, please have a look at these works as well. I will give you in the last slide, I will give you also a link where you can access these materials. Most of these materials, I should also say, are available online in open access, because I think it is very important that also people who do not have access to libraries that have these volumes can make use of our study. So scholars working on the Puranas have long struggled to identify the nature of the text going under the name of Skandapurāṇa. And for a start, I would like to distinguish it from what it is not in order to avoid any potential for confusion. In this respect, I was pleased to hear Professor Prasad's introduction, because basically what he referred to was the Skandapurāṇa as it was known in the 20th century, that is before the time of publication of this early Skandapurāṇa. What happened in the 20th century, at the start of the 20th century, the Venkateshwara Press, based in Mumbai, which was a very influential publishing house, set about publishing a number of Puranas. One of them was the Skandapurāṇa. And for the Skandapurāṇa, what they did was they assembled, they collected a number of khandas that were attributed to the Skandapurāṇa, and they published it under one name. It's a 7-volume work that incorporates all kinds of khandas, such as the Kashi Khanda, maybe the most famous one, about the sanctity of the pilgrimage center of Varanasi, but also the Avanti Khanda or the Kedara Khanda. Now, in this talk, what I'm concerned with is an entirely different text. It shares the same name, but in fact, in terms of content, it's something entirely separate. What I'm dealing with is the text simply called the Skandapurāṇa. So I've given you here a sort of overview of the development of the Skandapurāṇa, and also in red you see where the production of these khandas come into play. In black, I've given you the historical framework for the Skandapurāṇa itself. And so for a start, we look at a text that we believe was produced around the 6th, 7th century, most probably in northern India. Perhaps Varanasi or Kannauj would have been a likely candidate. And this text is simply called the Skandapurāṇa. So there's no mention here of khandas. It's simply Skandapurāṇa. This is what we see in the colophons, Iti Skandapurāṇe. Then around the 9th century, probably, we see that this same Skandapurāṇa was redacted. So that means major changes were introduced in this text. A large part was still the same, but some parts were changed on an individual verse level, or individual chapters were added, it was extended. But effectively, we're still dealing with the same text. Then, and this is much later, as you can see, the 12th to the 13th century roughly, so that's about six, 7 centuries later, we start seeing the appearance of new individual khandas. These are texts that are originally individual compositions that at the same time were attributed to the Skandapurāṇa. Yeah, so the Kashi Khanda, the Kedara Khanda are examples of this. And what happened is that over time, these khandas came to replace the text that originally went by the name of Skandapurāṇa, and as a consequence, this original more or less got lost. So when in 1910, the Venkateshwara Press edition published the Skandapurāṇa, what they did was they collected these khandas and they published this as the Skandapurāṇa. What's important to stress here also is that up to the time of the Venkateshwara Press edition, there was no such collection, because in fact, there are no manuscripts that contain all these khandas. These khandas are individual manuscripts. It's only when the Venkateshwara Press collected them that they came to be seen as a whole. In fact, there are also khandas that were not included in there, such as the Himavad Khanda, the Sahyadri Khanda, and the Hemakuta Khanda, and many more. In that respect, indeed, as Professor Prasad was already indicating, the Skandapurāṇa tradition is a very, very complex tradition. Okay, so that's in order to distinguish the early Skandapurāṇa that I'm concerned with from the various khandas that were later on attributed to the text over time. Then by the end of the 20th century, we start to get access for the very first time as scholars to the text of the early Skandapurāṇa, and that was done by a Nepalese scholar, Krishna Prasada Bhattarai, who published in Kathmandu at the time in 1989 this text, so that means the original early Skandapurāṇa, but under the title of Ambika Khanda. That was a bit confusing, but so he published it under a different title, but actually what we're dealing with there, as it showed, was the text long held to be lost, which constitutes the early or original Skandapurāṇa. And then finally, so now I come to our own project, then at the end of the 20th century and now continued, we've taken up the challenge of editing the Skandapurāṇa, so this early Skandapurāṇa, on the basis of all the surviving manuscripts in the form of a critical edition, in order to fully lay out what may happen to such a text. So the goal of the critical edition is, on the one hand, indeed, to get as close as possible to what might have been, what we think is most likely, the original form of the text. That's one aspect of the critical edition. Another major aspect, as far as I'm concerned, is also to show the various changes. These changes are also important because, as I said from the start, the Puranas are living traditions. So it's not only the original that is interesting, but it's also interesting to see what may happen to a Purana over time. Then, so how do we know that this is this text that I'm talking about, this early Skandapurāṇa, is in fact the original? Well, to establish this, not only the manuscripts are important, the manuscripts are very early, but also for this citations of the Skandapurāṇa in a broad range of works are important. And this, the importance of these kinds of citations was first of all shown by the work of R.C. Hazra. R.C. Hazra, in his very important book, Studies in the Puranic Records on Hindu Rites and Customs, published in 1940, collected many of these quotations of Puranas in the so-called Dharma Nibandhas. Dharma Nibandhas are huge collections, basically consisting of citations, often from Puranas, organized around individual topics. So you will get Dharma Nibandhas on Dana, on the notion of giving, or Dharma Nibandhas on Tirtha, on pilgrimage sites. And what transpires from these quotations is that the early Dharma Nibandhas, and then I'm looking in particular here on the list, Lakshmidhara in his Kritya Kalpataru, Palala Sena in the Dana Sagara, Himadri in the Chattavarga Chintamani, these authors, when they quote from the Skandapurāṇa, what they quote is in fact the text that we can find in our text, in the manuscripts that we are studying. The text that they are quoting cannot be found in any of the khandas that were published by the Venkateshwara Press. And that is because these khandas only were produced at a much later time in the medieval period. We start seeing the appearance of these khandas from around the 13th century. So what I've given you here is a list of the various Dharma Nibandha authors that quote our early Skandapurāṇa. Then I will turn now to the manuscripts. So I'll introduce you to the manuscripts that survive for this text. And what you can see here is indeed that we're dealing with very old manuscripts. Having access to such old manuscripts completely changes our understanding of the form of the text. These manuscripts, they come from Nepal. These manuscripts that I'm showing you here, these are the oldest manuscripts. And it's not surprising that they come from Nepal because, as you know, probably know, manuscripts in India, because of the humid climate, do not survive very long. 300 years is often given as a roughly the time it takes for a manuscript to survive. So unless a manuscript is unless a manuscript is copied, often also text can get lost along the way. But Nepal has a very different climate, and as a consequence also, manuscripts survive much longer there. And the Skandapurāṇa is a perfect example of the potential for the study of Sanskrit literature that Nepal offers. The Skandapurāṇa is not alone in that. There are many, many texts that survive in Nepal in much earlier manuscript form than in the rest of the Indian subcontinent. So what you see here are the manuscripts that we refer to in our edition as S1, S2, and S3. S basically stands for Skandapurāṇa. And the first one, S1, is maybe the most important because that bears a date. So that also gives us hard evidence for the form of the text and its existence. This bears the date Samvat 234, Samvat 234. Well, this was written in Nepal at the time in the so-called Lichavi script, named after the Lichavi rulers. And the dating refers to the era of Manadeva. If you calculate that, that means this manuscript comes from 810 of the Common Era, so early 9th century. That's important to stress because this is in fact what you're looking at, the oldest Purana manuscript in existence. Yeah, of any Purana, this is the oldest Purana manuscript, dated Purana manuscript. The second one there, S2, looks very similar. The script is very similar. We think it might even be a little earlier. In any case, it's from the same time, also from Nepal. It survives in the National Archives of Kathmandu. And then finally, the last one you see is referred to in our edition as S3 and S4. That is because in origin, this used to be one manuscript, but it was separated. One part, S3, survives in Nepal. The other part, S4, survives in Oxford, in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. But in fact, it constitutes two parts of one and the same manuscript. So we can regard it as one manuscript. Only in the present day, it has been separated. So I cannot stress this enough, the importance of these manuscripts, because this means that for the first time in the case of Puranas, we actually have a real hard basis. This is real evidence for the form of a text in a particular moment in time. And then I turn to the remaining manuscripts for our early Skandapurāṇa. And the first one I want to show you is this one. This is a manuscript written in Old Bengali script. It's a manuscript from the 17th century, paper manuscript from Bengal. We refer to it as R because in contrast to the other Nepalese manuscript that I showed you, this manuscript refers to the text as Reva Khanda. So it says Iti Reva Khanda Khande Skandapurāṇe. So thus in the Skandapurāṇa, in the Reva Khanda. Although it refers to it as Reva Khanda, in fact it is the same text. And then finally we have a handful of North Indian manuscripts written in Nagari or Devanagari script, and you see here a recent example, relatively recent example, the one that we refer to as A3. And these manuscripts refer to the text as Ambika Khanda of the Skandapurāṇa. Yeah, so these two, Reva Khanda and Ambika Khanda, are two later recensions of what in origin was the same text. And we think that this text, so the Skandapurāṇa itself, for which our earliest evidence are these Nepalese manuscripts, the text itself was most likely composed around the 6th to the 7th century in North India. And it is the Nepalese recension, because that is the oldest form of the text, that forms the focus of our edition. I now want to say a couple of things about how we present the text, and then I will turn to some examples to give you a flavor of the work. So what you see here is a page from the critical edition. On top is the main text, so the text as we have reconstituted it. That is, as such, the text that is not necessarily one that you find in the manuscripts. It's what we as editors think is the most likely form of the text that explains the variants found in the individual manuscripts. So this is a hypothesis of what we think most likely the text looked like in an earlier form. And for that, first of all, the Nepalese manuscripts provide our most important basis, but we of course also take into account these later Reva Khanda and Ambika Khanda manuscripts. Then if you turn to the bottom of the page, you'll find the main apparatus. The main apparatus is a positive apparatus. A positive apparatus is an apparatus that first of all quotes in the lemma, after the lemma, gives you the manuscript that actually supports the reading. So first of all, you see a quotation of a word from the edition, and then we give the manuscripts that actually support it. And after that, we give variants from different manuscripts. A positive apparatus is important because that provides you with real evidence for the actual manuscripts that do support the reading. Then above that, you'll see a lacuna register. So we also report missing syllables or illegible syllables. If you think about, again, bear in mind these palm leaf manuscripts, you see, for example, in S3 and S4 that large parts are missing. In that case, we also report that so that, again, from the perspective of a critical edition, you also get to see what we cannot read. Above that are two extra layers, the Ambika Khanda layer and the Reva Khanda layer. And here, the reader can as such immediately see what has happened in the redactions of the text in the Reva Khanda and the Ambika Khanda. And so what often happens in the reading of editions is that people only accept and read the reconstituted text. I do want to make a call here for critical reading of critical editions. Yeah, so a critical edition on the one hand is an edition that critically represents all the readings and reconstitutes the text that we think is the most likely the original, but it is also a text meant for a critical reader. So it's also a text that ideally is used by readers in order to also look at all the variants and not only look at it simply as variants, but also as providing information on the development of ideas, development of stories, development of rituals, development of linguistics aspects of the text, you name it. All of these questions can be addressed via readings provided in the apparatus. So that is by way of introduction to the text itself. The early Skandapurāṇa, I want to distinguish it from the khandas that later were attributed to it. And then now I want to give you a couple of examples of passages from the text to illustrate what it is like. First of all, it is a Shaiva Purana. It is one of the first Shaiva Puranas, in fact. That means it's a Purana that advocates Shiva worship. Its main understanding of the cosmos is that everything is ruled by Shiva, also called Mahadeva or Ishvara. And he's not alone. He also has his wife Parvati. Parvati also has a very important place in this whole understanding of the cosmos. So the Shiva is the main lord, and Parvati is his devoted wife. Then the text, as its title indicates, is about Skanda. Yes, so it's concerned with the birth of the war god Skanda as the son of Shiva and Parvati, but it is a complex birth, and we will get to that. Along the way, however, all kinds of stories, narratives are integrated that we know from earlier sources. Yes, so the Skandapurāṇa makes use of the Mahabharata, of the Harivansha, of the Vishnu Purana, of some of the earlier material, but presents it in a new light, presents it in a way in which Shiva is the main god who controls affairs. To give you just an example of that, the Skandapurāṇa also has a number of very interesting versions of Vishnu's avatars. So the Narasingha Avatara, the Varaha Avatara, etc. But what is striking in the way the text tells these stories is that after Vishnu's Avatara has done its job, the Avatara refuses to return back to its own form. So the Avatara, Vishnu in his Avatara form, hangs on to his Avatara form after he has done what he's needed to do. And then in order to prevent this from happening, Shiva has to interfere to make him return again, to make Vishnu return again back to his original form. So this is a clear way in which the Shaiva authors of the text present Shiva as the main Lord, the main Ishvara, who's in control of all affairs and who is as such also in control of Vishnu and his undertakings. All right, then I want to begin with the beginnings. So I've given you here a quotation. What I will do now is go through some verses and to illustrate the content of the text and also what I think is the lively character of the text. It's a very enjoyable work with a lot of humor, a lot of visual elements, great storytelling. So we start with the beginning with the question put by the sages. This refers to the sages who, according to the beginning of the text, were bathing at the time of the full moon at the confluence of the Ganga and the Yamuna River in Prayaga. And as they were bathing there, a Sutta arrived, and when they saw the Sutta, they addressed him as follows. So what you will read now, what you will hear now, is the question that the sages put to the Sutta. Katitam bharatakyanam puranam cha paramtvaya tenanach pratibhasitvam sakshat satyavati sutach. So what they are saying here is, you, Tvaya, have told Katitam, the Bharatakyanam, the story of the Mahabharata, Puranam Chaparam, and also the great Purana, the supreme Purana. Tena, therefore, nach pratibhasitvam sakshat satyavati sutta. Therefore, you appear to us like a Satyavati Sutta embodied, like the son of Vyasa embodied. So in the first verse, they immediately show their respect for him because he's already been the narrator of the Mahabharata as well as of the Purana, not specified further by name. Then we get another verse praising him in terms of his knowledge. He is Sarvagama Paratatna. He is knowledgeable, na, in the supreme meaning, the Pararta, Sarvagama, of all the Agama, all the tradition. He's also Satya Dharma Parayana. He is dedicated Parayana to the Satya Dharma, to the Dharma of truth. Dvija Puja Rato Nicham. Also, he is said to be constantly devoted, delighting, maybe Rata, in the Dvija Puja, in the worship, in the veneration of twice-born. Tena Percham Tvam Arhasi. Therefore, you are worthy this question. So, since he is so knowledgeable, since he is so venerable, they think that he can answer the following question, which is the question that gives the text its name. Bharatakyana Sadrasham Purana Dyat Vishishyate Tattva Perchama Vai Janma Kartikeya Shadimatach. They ask him here the following: that which Yat, which excels Vishishyate, which excels the Purana, which is Bharatakyana Sadrasham, which is equal to the story of the Mahabharata, the Bharatakyana, that we ask you, Tattva Prachamavai, namely the Janma, the birth of Kartikeya, Janma Kartikeya Shadimatah, the birth of Skanda, also known as Kartikeya, the wise one, Dimat, of the wise Kartikeya. So they ask him about to tell them about the birth of Kartikeya, of Skanda. Ime himunaya sarve tvat upasti parayana, Skandasambhāṣā shushrusha samjata utsukyamanasa. For all these sages here, and here they refer to themselves and everyone around, all these sages here are tvat upasti parayana, are dedicated to tvat upasti, to your worship. And they are Skandasambhāṣā shushrusha samjata utsukyamanasa. They're all, their minds are all eager for hearing about the birth, the Sambhava of Skanda. And so the Skandapurāṇa is the answer that the sutta gives to this question of the sages about the birth of Skanda. Then, as every Purana in a way, we then get a frame story. This is a frame story, and then we get an extra layer inside it, because the sutta will not immediately start giving his own account, but he will tell the sages what has already been told earlier. And this takes us to the next passage. So I've given you here again a citation from the very first chapter of the Skandapurāṇa, verse 24. Here, the sage, the sutta, has introduced Vyasa, and he's I've skipped this part, but what has happened in between is he's telling how Vyasa, after the moment of liberation of his son Shuka, you may remember from the Mahabharata, Shuka, his son, attained liberation. After his son Shuka has achieved liberation, Vyasa is distraught. He is lost, although this is a great thing, of course, that his son has gained liberation. He's also sad he has lost his son. And then on his wanderings, he meets the sage Sanat Kumara. He meets Sanat Kumara, the mind-born son of Brahma. And then he addresses Sanat Kumara as follows. Kumara Shakatam Janma Kartikeya Shadhimatah Kinnimitam Kuto Vasha Ichamye Tat Hiveditum. So this is Vyasa asking more or less the same question that the sages had put to the sutta. How, Katam, is the Kumara Shajanma? How is the birth of Kumara, Kartikeya, Dhimat? So how is the birth of the wise Kumara of Kartikeya? Kinnimitam, and what was its cause? Kinnimitam, and whence, from where, Kuto, does he come? Kuto Vasha. Ichamye tat hiveditum. This I wish to know. This indeed I wish to know. Katam, and then it comes, this is very interesting, I find. Katam Rudra Sutaschasav. And how is it that he is the son of Rudra, Rudra Sutta? Vachni Ganga Sutach Katam. And how is he the son of Vachni, of fire, and of Ganga, of the Ganges, of the Devi, Ganga? Umayas Tanayas Jaiva. And how is it that he is the son of Uma? Svahayas Jakatampunach. And how again is it that he is the son of Svaha, the wife of Agni? Suparnyas Jata. And how again is he the son of Suparni? Matrinam Kritikanam Katam Chasach. And how again is it that he is also the son of the mothers of the Kritikas? Kastyasau Purvam Utpanach. And who is he? He who was born in an earlier time. Kintapach. What is his tapas? What is his austerity? Kastya Vikrama. And what is his Vikrama, his valor? Bhuta Sammohanam Hyetat Katayasvayatatatam. This is confusing Sammohana to beings. Tell it Katayasva Yatatatam as it truly is. And so what Vyasa is asking Sanat Kumara here is, first of all, simply who is Skanda, but then specifically he wants to know, how can he be the son of Rudra, of Agni, of Ganga, of Uma, of Swaha, of Suparni, of the mothers of the Kritikas? This is interesting because Vyasa himself in the Mahabharata, after all, Vyasa is the proposed author of the Mahabharata, Vyasa himself has given us various accounts of the birth, various conflicting accounts of the birth of Skanda in the Mahabharata. So the Skandapurāṇa, which was produced after the completion of the Mahabharata, in this way takes over the tradition of the Mahabharata, for it makes the all-knowing Vyasa put a question that he cannot answer, and he makes him put this question to Sanat Kumara about something that he himself has told conflicting accounts. And then, so after this, Sanat Kumara starts speaking, and he starts telling about the events that lead up to his birth, also his birth itself, and also the events that follow it, namely Skanda as depicted on the image. Skanda becomes the general of the army of the gods and will defeat the demon Taraka. All of this is told throughout the long narration of the Skandapurāṇa, which then also includes all kinds of side stories. Okay, so that was from the beginning of the text. Then now I skip a large part. I turn to chapter 32. This chapter 32, contains a very interesting, very original version of the famous Daksha myth, the story of the destruction of Daksha's sacrifice. Daksha, according to also other versions, held a major sacrifice at which all the gods were invited, with the exception of Shiva. And then Shiva's troops, his Ganas, his Ganapas, they are sent and they destroy this sacrifice of Daksha. And then what happens in the Skandapurāṇa, in the early Skandapurāṇa, is unique. This is a part that I don't know from any other context. The gods then take refuge with Shiva, and they are led into his body. So the gods are led into the body of Shiva, and in the body of Shiva they encounter the entire universe. They are taken through all kinds of levels of cosmic levels. They find all kinds of visions there. They are frightened along the way. And in the end, they are taken out again and they encounter Shiva, and they encounter his wife, Parvati, next to him. And then they seek refuge with him. They seek refuge with Shiva. They ask for pardoning. But then Shiva says that he is not angry with him, but Devi, the goddess, is angry with him. And then Devi manifests a terrifying form. This form is called Kala Karni in the text. Kala Karni is a furious form of the goddess with multiple arms, dark, all kinds of weapons, fiery, and the gods are frightened by this. And I want to read you a couple of lines from what happens next, because this is an important passage for the general background, religious background of the text. The text was produced by a group of people who we can identify as Pashupatas. Pashupatas were the earliest organized worshippers of Shiva. This is before Tantric Shaivism takes off, and they're particularly well known for their bathing in ashes. Yeah, the bath in ashes is an important aspect of their practice, and this version of the Daksha myth tells about how the gods came to be Pashupatas by bathing in ashes. So I'll read now verse 103 from chapter 32. Paya vibhutas te deva Vatyamanas Sarvashach, Nashekuh Puratastatum Vyagran Murgagana Iva. The gods, Devach, te Devach, overcome by fear, by Abhibhutas, being destroyed, Vajamana, slain on all sides, Sarvashach, all around, they were not able to stand in front of her. Nashekuh Puratastatum. So this refers to Kalakarni. They're so frightened by Kalakarni that they're no longer able to stand in front. And then we get a simile, Vyagran Murgagana Iva. Just like deer, groups of deer in front of a tiger. So when deer are facing a tiger, they're also afraid. So the gods are compared to deer facing a tiger. The gods standing in front of this fury of the goddess. Tato, Vyatita Chittaste, Kalakarnya Bayatsura, Pasmarashim Stitam Parshve, Devasha Vivishur Bhayat. Thereupon, Tatas, they, with confused minds, out of fear, Bayat, the gods, out of fear for Kalakarnyach Bayat, what did they do? They vivishur, they entered out of fear, Bayat, they entered Basmarashim, they entered a heap of ashes, Basmarashim, and that heap of ashes is said to be Stitham Parshve Devasha, to the side of the god. So, in other words, Shiva has a heap of ashes next to him. It's a very visual image. Shiva has a heap of ashes next to him, which he, of course, needs for his own smearing with ashes. And they dive into it because they're frightened for the fury of Devi in the form of Kalakarni. Tan drishtva basmakutan tu pravishtan charanartinach Suran Bhasma Viliptangan Devin Devin Yashedayat. On seeing them, Tan Drishtva, Bhasmakutam to Pravishtan, entered into this heap of ashes, Sharanartinach, seeking shelter. Devi Devim Yashedayat, the goddess prevented or prohibited Devi. Yeah, so here, Devi in the nominative refers to Parvati, and Devi in the accusative refers to her form as Kalakarni. So she now prevents Devi from from Kalakarni from being destructive. And she does so, having seen them entering this heap of ashes, them the Suran, the gods, Bhasma Viliptangan, whose limbs, Anga, or bodies, were smeared, vilipta, with ashes, bhasma viliptangan. So now Devi, Parvati, is going to address Kalakarni in order to prevent her from destroying the gods in her fury. Devi Uvacha. Kalakarni, Nivartasva, Mavadi Surasattaman, Ete Pashupati Bhuta, Pasmana Diktamurtayach. O Kalakarni, Nivartasva, stop, withdraw. Mavadi, do not destroy Surasattaman, the best of the gods. For Ete Pashupati Bhuta, Basmana Diktamurtayach. These have become Pashupatas. They've become Pashupatas. Their bodies luminous with ash. Basmana Diktamurtayach. Etat Pashupati Proktam Vratam Pashupatam Pura Yat Basmana Pavitrena Snanam Snanepya Uttamam. For this Vrata, this observance, the Pashupata observance, Vratam Pashupata, was spoken, Proktam, earlier, Pura, by Pashupati. And this Pashupata Vrata is the one that is identified in verse 107 as Yat Basmana Pavitrena Snanam Snanebhya Uttamam. The bathing in ashes, Basmana Snanam, in purifying ashes, Basmana Pavitrena, is better, is supreme above all other baths. Yeah, so the ash bath is better than the water bath. This is the Pashupata Vrata. And yeah, her argument now is that by entering this heap of ashes, the gods have actually taken initiation as Pashupatas, and therefore Kalakarni should not destroy them. They are saved in this regard. And her argument is also continued then in the next verse. Ete bhagavato vasham anugrahyah surottamah basmayena pravishtastu tasman maitan vinashaya. These ones, the gods, avasham, for certain, are to be favored, anugrahya, are worthy of favor from the Bhagavat, from God. These, the best of the gods. And so they have now, they are worthy of the God's favor or grace, his anugraha, which is a very important term in Pashupata doctrine. Basma yena pravishtastu, since they have entered ashes, tasman maivan vinashaya, therefore you should not destroy them. Raudrach pashava etehi, for these ones are pashu, are souls who are dedicated to Rudra. Raudrach pashava etehi, praveshat basman nauduna, now that they've entered ashes. So now that they've entered ashes, they've become special souls. They've become pashu who are dedicated to Rudra. Jatas jaganapa sarve, and they have all been born as Ganapas, as these servants of Shiva who are close to him, and which is actually the ideal of Pashupata Shaivism, to become a Ganapa, a loyal servant belonging to the entourage of Shiva. Hantavyana Tvayeshvari. And so they are not to be destroyed by you, O goddess, O mistress Ishvari. So this is, I think, an important passage. First of all, it's an episode that we don't find in any other Puranas that tell about the destruction of Daksha's sacrifice. This follows after the destruction of Daksha's sacrifice, because it turns the gods, so the main gods, into devotees of Shiva, into Pashupatas initiated by bathing in ashes. And thereby they, of course, also provide a model for bhaktas, for devotees, that ultimately it's only by devotion to Shiva as Pashupati that through liberation from the bonds of being a bound soul is possible, the bonds of being Pashu. And Pashupati being the master of bound souls. Now, to finish, I have one more passage which shows indeed that the Pashupatas, the Pashupata tradition was behind the production of this early Skandapurāṇa, and that concerns the originator of the Pashupata tradition, named Lakulisha. Lakulisha literally means the Lord with the stick, Lakulisha, and this person is known from a variety of Puranic sources, also sometimes referred to in inscriptions by Pashupatas. Pashupatas were very influential, left behind their marks on numerous temples in India. Well, you see Lakulisha here depicted, for example, in the image. This one is from Badami, from one of the cave temples in Badami. This is an interesting image because you see on top Lakulisha surrounded by his four pupils. Lakulisha clearly recognizable by the stick that he has in his hand. But below it we see Skanda on his peacock and with the spear in his hand. It's almost like it has the same type of iconography. So somebody clearly wanted to connect Skanda with Lakulisha iconographically in this image. Anyway, the passage that I've selected here comes from chapter 167. This was the original subject of my PhD thesis, chapter 167. It's a very interesting chapter which tells about the ayatanas of Shiva. It's as such. Yeah, it gives an overview of the main sacred sites of Shaivism in the early 6th, 7th century, starting from the Himalayan mountains, and then it descends into the Ganges Delta, and goes through the Vindhyas up to the Deccan, and then along the way it also mentions a place called Karohana, which is in other sources also known as Kaya Varohana and Kaya Vatarana, which is a place in Gujarat, in modern day Gujarat. You can still go there. There are archaeological excavations which also show that indeed this was a major center of Shaivism at the time. So according to the narrative that I've not given you here, I've only given you, of course, a selection. According to the narrative, Shiva descended in the form of Lakulisha. He took on a bodily manifestation, and he did so in this place called Karohana. And there then he favors a man called Soma Sharman, and then I've given you the verses that follow. So this is after he has descended into this place called Karohana. Anugrahya, there we see the same concept of anugrah, of favor. Anugrahya Tadvidyasambhāṣā sakulam Tadvidyasattamam jagamo jayanim devah shmashanam chaviveshaha. Then, at that time, having favored Anugrahya, O Vyasa, this is Sanat Kumara addressing Vyasa, having favored the best of Brahmins together with his family, this refers to this earlier character of Soma Sharman, having done so, Jagama Ujjayanim Devah, God went to Ujjain, Jagama Ujjayanim Devah. So this refers to Shiva in his bodily manifestation, in his avatara as Lakulisha. God went to Ujjain, Smashanam Chaviveshaha, and he entered the cremation ground. Sa tatra basmana tmanam avaguntya prishatvajah omukam vamahastena grhitva samopavishat. And he, there on the cremation ground in Ujjain, after covering himself with ashes, he, Vrishatvaja, another name referring to Shiva, he took Grhitva an Ulmuka, a firebrand in his left hand, Ulmukam Vamahastena, and he sat down, Sam Upavishat. And so he took up a firebrand, presumably a firebrand lying on the cremation ground, and he sat down. Tatra pratamam adaya shisham kaushikam ishvarah jambumarge dvitiyam cha maturayam tatoparam. And there, that is in Ujjain, pratamam adaya shisham kaushikam ishvarah. Ishvara, the Lord, having accepted as his first pupil, pratama shisha, Kaushika, this is the name of Lakulisha's first pupil, Jambu Marge Dvitiyam cha, and the second one in Jambu Marga, Maturayam Tatoparam, and thereupon another one in Mathura, Kanyakupje Tataschanyam Anugrahya Jagatpati, and the Lord of the world having favored another one thereupon in Kanjakupcha, Svasidantam Dadau Yogam Uvachedam Chalagudi. He then gave yoga, which is his own doctrine, Svasidantam Yogam, so that refers to Pashupata Yoga. Pashupata Yoga, union with Pashupati, happens through, first of all, bathing in ashes, which is applied with mantras that embody Shiva's presence. So he gave them yoga, and he, Lagudi, that's another name for Lakulisha, he said the following. Now, I've not given you what follows. If you want to read that, you'll have to read the text itself. But what follows is he starts teaching about the Pashupata doctrine that his 4 pupils are supposed to spread around the world. And so this is a foundation story about God's descent as Lakulisha, in a particular place of Karohana, and then walking to Ujjain to initiate his first pupil in Kushika in Ujjain. Then his second one, who is named Gargya in Jambumarga, the third one named Mitra in Mathura, and the fourth one named Kaurisha in Kanjagupta. And these four lineages are these also are sometimes in inscriptions referred to as four lineages. So later historical inscriptions often also refer to this this notion of Lakulisha's descent and the initiation of these four guru lines. So that's in terms of presentation of the Skandapurāṇa's religious background, which is very much one that propagates ideas of Pāśyapata Shaivism. In conclusion, I want to summarize the main character of the text and what you may expect to gain from it should you be interested in it. First of all, I hope to have shown you the Skandapurāṇa is an important source for the history and the mythology of early Shaivism, in particular the Pāśyapatas. The Skandapurāṇa is the earliest known fully Shaiva Purana, and it tells us in that respect many myths about Shiva and his relation, many stories about Shiva and his relation to the other gods, but it also incorporates passages such as the last one that I mentioned, which actually also shows something about historical reality, because it also refers to actual places and most likely guru lineages that were established there. Then something I have not been able to go into, but the Skandapurāṇa is also an extremely important source for the development of the figure of Devi, and in particular of Mahadevi, because in the form of Parvati, Shiva's devoted wife, in the text, the authors have also integrated all kinds of other material surrounding the goddess, and in particular, as my colleague Yuko Yokochi has shown, the Skandapurāṇa authors integrate her earlier form as Kaushiki Vinjavasini, and Kaushiki Vinjavasini is a goddess who is associated with the buffalo demon killing Mahishasura Mardini. She's associated also with the destruction of Shumba and Nishumba. And according to Yokochi, the Skandapurāṇa's version of these episodes actually precedes the ones told in the Devi Mahatmya. So the Skandapurāṇa, the early Skandapurāṇa, also gives us new insight into the development of the mythology of Devi. Then also it gives us an interesting insight into religious interaction, you might say, into the interaction between rivaling traditions. Vishnu, for example, in particular, is clearly subjected by Shiva in numerous stories, and the same happens also to Brahma. And we're also told a lot about all kinds of beings, such as the gods also, as we saw earlier, into how they become Ganapas. And then finally, this is more to do with methodology, but the critical edition of this text and the critical edition based on manuscripts that are way earlier than almost all the manuscripts used for other Puranas provide a firm basis for the historical study of Puranic narratives and traditions. So with that, I finish my talk, and then I'll try to go back and out of my slideshow. That happens this way, I believe.
Thank you, Professor, for a very insightful and scholarly lecture. With Shivaratri, Mahashivaratri around the corner, the timing of this lecture couldn't have been more perfect. Thank you indeed.
Thank you.
We have very limited time for question answers, so I would request the audience to be brief and precise when posing the questions, and maybe we can take up 2 or 3 questions. Any questions from the learned audience here.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Please go ahead with your
Sir, yeah, regarding the Skandapurāṇa, Kartikeya is more considered in the southern India as a Tamil deity or a god belonging to Tamil culture. So, do we get any references regarding that in the Skandapurāṇa, or what is the context regarding that, sir?
Thank you very much for this this question. Yes, So in the context of Tamil Nadu, of course, until the present day, indeed, he's almost like a national deity, Murugan. But no, we don't get anything relating to that. In fact, Skanda also has a very important early history in northwestern India. The earliest images of, also if you look at it in terms of material evidence, already from the Kushana period. So we have these Kushana images of Kartikeya, of Skanda. So and the text itself also, as I mentioned, we think that it was composed in northern India. It does not show much knowledge of southern India. That's my impression. So also on the basis of the chapter that I mentioned, the chapter about Shiva's Ayatanas, the southernmost point that is mentioned is Sri Parvata or Sri Shaila. But it doesn't go. It doesn't.
Beyond that.
It doesn't show any knowledge of the real South, so to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, madam, for asking your question. Any other questions for the professor?
Yeah, Madhuji is there. Madhuji, please.
Yes, please go ahead with your question, sir.
Please unmute, Madhuji.
Namaste, sir.
Madhusudanji, please unmute.
Okay. Now, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Sir, you have mentioned about one manuscript in Nevari script. Are you including Satyanarayana Vratagatha in your edition or not? Because it is mentioned in Reva Khanda. Generally, it is used for puja purpose.
No, we're not including that. That would be an impossible task, as I think I've hoped to show. So what we are doing in our edition is we're working on the text that first of all in Nepalese manuscript simply calls itself Skandapurāṇa, which is I think an original text that had its own identity, and then various texts that later were attributed to it are not incorporated because that's it. In my understanding, these are individual texts that get attributed to the Skandapurāṇa, but in terms of content, they have no commonality. They do not share anything in common.
Sir, in Bengali version of that manuscript, it is clearly mentioned that Skandapurāṇa, Reva Khanda, and Satyanarayana Vratagatha, it is mentioned, but another manuscripts, it doesn't have this text. So, have you?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I realize that it's also confusing because the Reva Khanda and Ambika Khanda manuscripts, well, first of all, they are recensions. So in that respect, I still treat them as the same text. Because they start from the same basis. They have a lot of material in common, only they've expanded. But a title has been given to that as Khanda, which suggests that it is just one of the other Khandas. But in fact, it is not. Yeah. So in that respect, the Reva Khanda and Ambika Khanda manuscripts are different. They still follow the main source text, whereas all the other Khandas, so and materials, they are completely new text that get attributed to it, and as such you also don't find a manuscript that incorporates it. So then you also are looking at different manuscripts that have nothing in common with this text. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, and the manuscript, by the way, is not written in Nevari, but in we call it Lichavi because it's an early form of Nepalese manuscript, so preceding Nevari type of writing.
Thank you, Madhusudanji, and thank you, Professor, for the reply. Any other questions for the eminent scholar here. Anyone else would like to ask one or two? We just have time for one last question, and then we will move on to the vote of thanks.
May I?
Any questions? Yes,
Yeah,
yes, Abhi.
that Bengali script, sir, was that in Gaudi? That old Bengali script, Gaudi Lipi, was that?
Well, it depends a bit upon the naming that you give. I mean, but yeah, it's a 17th century type of script. Yeah, I mean, I refer to it as Old Bengali.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, it's of course these labels are there's still a lot of work to be done actually on precise identifications of types. But yeah, there are other examples of this type as well. It's difficult to read.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to read. It's often like ra and va are ra va
Yeah,
va
yeah.
are all the same.
And na la, of course,
Yeah,
these two are also. Yeah,
yeah.
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 Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Abhi. So I guess we can wind up now with the vote of thanks. So I request our professor and head of the department, Professor JSR Prasad Garu, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, kindly excuse me. I'm sitting in dark. Power went off in my office. I'm using my phone to, join you. Kindly excuse me for this inconvenience. It was a wonderful presentation by Professor Peter. First of all, I congratulate you for doing this massive work of critically editing the Skandapurāṇa, which is one of the major and the biggest Puranas among the 18 Puranas. And it was very, very soothing for ears when you recite the shlokas, especially in the Devanagari. You are reading and you are explaining with full clarity. It was excellent. Also, this reminds us about the beautiful gods, Skanda, or Kartikeya, or Subramanya. Amarkosha lists many of his synonyms. One of the most beautiful gods in Hindu mythology, Puranic literature. Skanda is representing the serpentine motion, and he is actually sitting on serpent, and this serpent is representing the mind. That way, Skanda, Subramanya, or Kartikeya are related to our mental functioning also. There is a philosophical connotation and also scientific connotation like this. So, this is one of the 6 matas, 6 traditions, religious traditions established by Sri Shankaracharya in the 8th century. One of them is Kaumara. Is a Kumara. It's called as Kumara. There is it's called Kaumara, one of the most important religious traditions. Because earlier there were so many traditions in India. All of them have been put together by Sri Shankara, and he has reduced to 6 only. That is so this Panchayat and Puja came into picture in many households for a long, long time. And Professor Peter talked about the initial efforts in publishing the critical edition, starting from Professor Isaacson Barker, his own Guruji, in 1998, Volume 1. Later on, 2005, 2014, 2013, 18, and recently 2021, Professor Ekochi has published these volumes. So you can observe the time lapse between these many years, starting from 1998. So much effort has been went in, and it is very tedious, as we thought earlier. Critical edition is a very tedious task, and it requires serious scholarship. To prepare the critical apparatus. It requires a lot of scholarship and understanding. It's not only Sanskrit scholarship, contextual meanings, and if there are some characters or some words are missing, accordingly filling up the gaps. This requires a lot of skill, not only language skill but analytical skills. That way, these volumes prove the kind of contributions done by our colleagues over there. So we should be very thankful for them for bringing these wonderful editions. Based on these editions, I think Professor Peter also mentioned in the first slides, has written books on early Shaivism and the Skandapurāṇa, probably in 2006. Then he went on to talk about Dharma-nibandha citations. Then he talked about Nepali manuscripts on Skandapurāṇa. And the script, as Abir has asked, Purva Lichvi. I think for all the scripts, Brahmi is the mother from which all these scripts have been originated. And his observations on especially this 8th century manuscript from Nepali manuscript, he postulated that probably the original might have been composed in between 16th and 7th century. Later on, it is dated as 810 AD because it is preserved in Nepal. And interestingly, it is a most conducive region for the preservation of manuscripts. That is another a very good observation. And of course, Reva Khanda, Ambika Khanda, these things even I am not aware very much, I don't have much details about them. But today, I think most of the things have been clarified through his presentation. And also how the critical edition has been brought out. In one of the slides, he mentioned how the text is reconstructed and, how the Reva Khanda is there and how the Ambika Khanda is there. And what are the lacuna while comparing the manuscripts and what is the main apparatus. All these things has presented very clearly but briefly. And the Kadidam Bharatakhyanam Puranancha Parantvaya, the way he has started to narrate about how the text is started, really that is quite informative. And how the gods become Pashpatas and how Lakalisha Pashpatam came into existence and how it shows the evidences of Shaivism, early Shaivism, starting from Himalayas to Vindhya, all this he has mentioned very clearly. And the god who is having the Lakula, a kind of club holding in his hand, is called Lakulisha. So that is the etymology of Lakulisha word. And we should be thankful to his Guruji for producing such a young and enthusiastic great scholar that we are seeing in Professor Peter Bisschop. And I also thank Sri Madhusudan, who is a very good manuscriptologist and paleographist who can read many scripts, who has asked the question at the end, and also Ms. Sharada. This is an Ayurveda doctor and also Samhita Siddhanta student doing her MD for asking nice questions. This is really an eye-opener of how the work should be very serious when you commit. And it's a great contribution to Sanskrit Academy, sir. We really owe a lot to you. Thank you very much for giving us this time and presenting your research work very clearly. And we expect more interactions with you in future. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I also thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor B.J. Rao, sir, for making nice comments in the beginning. What he said is Skandapurāṇa is the representative of cultural heritage of India. So, being a scientist, he has general awareness about Puranas also. This proves that every Indian knows something. Is not a Sanskritist, not a scientist, not an engineer. Genetically, they know something. And the details, as our Vice Chancellor rightly put, should learn. We should learn from scholars like Professor Peter, because somewhere we lack some seriousness. This is very true. So also I thank all the participants for today's lecture, including my research scholars, students, and the project staff, and Professor Dr. Vinaya, my colleague, for coordinating the session. And I thank one and all. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank
the
you. Thank you very
opportunity to talk about this. And yeah, please contact me if you have any further questions. I'm always open to that.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Maikaji. Hello, hope you are doing well. And thank you, sir.